Hello, this is the Maple Moon podcast. I'm Courtney. Now, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, there is a stage direction that says, "The ghost cries beneath the stage." And that is quite pertinent to what I'm going to be talking about today, which is paranormal experiences, because I am quite the sensitive and have had many throughout the years. They have been physical, I've been touched. I've heard things, smelt things. Um, Basically the entire package. The first one that I suppose you could say I had was when I was around 5, and it was probably a year after my grandma had passed away. We were at my granddad's house, and he has a large landing, and we had these sombrero hats just lying around, and we put them on, and we were running around the landing with these hats on, and essentially on the far side of the landing you've got two windows between um a bit of space, and there's two bookcases. And as we were going round, I apparently just beelined for the window and looked out and started shouting, "Grandma, grandma, grandma." And she'd been dead for about a year at that point. Um, so that was the first one I've been told. But as far as the ones that I do remember distinctly is later on we went to it's a old house basically called Hallowwood, and it's, to be fair, I think it's actually not open to the public right now because of structural damage. But it was when I was a kid, and we went on a school trip, and they were showing us around as we did. We did some activities. But they were showing us around, and we went into the star chamber, which was one of the bedrooms, and there's a four-poster bed, a window behind, and then it's pretty much empty apart from this little chest. And we'd been shown around the room, told the history and whatnot, and we were leaving the room to go to another place in the house. But as we were supposed to be exiting, I was facing the four-poster bed with my back to the window, and I just couldn't move. I don't know what it was. It was just I was rooted to the spot. I couldn't, I just couldn't move. All I could do was look to my right at all my classmates and the teachers going down the stairs and just watch, because I just couldn't physically move for some reason. Something was keeping me to that spot. And then all of a sudden, I felt this big gust of wind behind me when the window isn't open, there's no gust of wind. And then all of a sudden, I could move again. So I turned around, and where the gust of wind had happened was all these sort of white wisps in the air. And it was essentially like if you smoke a cigarette and you get those like wispy bits. It was like that. It was so strange. And I think that's my first distinct paranormal experience that I've had before. And that's one I always remember. But I should probably go on to well, no, I'll save the most strange for last, even though it happened not long after the one that I just told you. But after that, I've had in another old house that's actually not far from the one I just told you about. I've been in there and there's been the rope swinging by itself. Um, I have heard children crying when there've been no children there. Um, I've heard footsteps when there's been nobody about because every time we've gone, we've usually gone um usually early morning, so there's not usually many people there. And actually, I went back to the first place years later and had an even stranger experience, which was happened in the gift shop. I was, it was a Saturday, I believe. So I was bent forward looking at the souvenirs and whatnot, and these little figures. And as far as I knew, um, my parents were talking to somebody, and my grandparents were just milling about. Um, but as I was bending down to look at the souvenirs, I felt what was like one singular finger, the index finger, on my back tapping me. But it felt so heavy, like it felt like a man's hand. And so I turned around expecting to see my granddad messing about. But no, there was nobody there. My grandparents were on one side of the room talking to an assistant, um, who works at the house, and my parents were doing the exact same thing on the other side of the room, and there was nobody there. And I kind of shrugged my shoulders and turned back. I realised, well, it's a ghost. And that was that. So since then, I've had, here and there experiences, and most of it is to do with smell or sound. For example, we stayed, I'm quarter Maltese if you didn't know, but we stayed in Malta obviously a lot when I was a kid. And the last time I went, the hotel we stayed in, it was new at the time, big 5-star hotel. Um, oh, that sounds awful. Not to the I'm saying 5-star for the context. It's not meant to be a brag, not everybody's fortunate enough to go to a 5-star hotel. But the point is that it was new at the time. So it wasn't an old building. But I think I'd forgotten to get something from the room one day. I was 10 at the time, and so my mom they probably shouldn't at the time, but this was, the 2000s. I was let back in to just, they gave me the key and I went up to the room. And I went in the lift and I went to the room, got my thing. And I went down the hall and then I went round the corner to the lifts or the elevators and I pressed the button. And as I'm waiting for the lift to open, there was nobody around. There was no cleaners or housekeepers that I'd seen on the way. But every time I went, I just kept hearing these footsteps. And so I kept getting scared. I kept pressing the button even more. And I just wanted the doors to open, and then the doors would open. I just wanted them to shut. So I kept pressing the button because I kept hearing these footsteps, and there'd been nobody there. And that happened quite frequently on that holiday. So much so that the friend that I'd made, Natalia, I kept making her come up with me because I didn't want to be by myself. She'd stayed, I think, a couple floors above us, because we were quite high up, but she was further up than us. Um, but that was another experience. That was quite surprising because you don't usually have paranormal experiences so in places like that, I guess. But speaking of hotel paranormal experiences, we had one in, I suppose you could say we had two technically. Well, one was in New York. We stayed at the first one was in Continental Barclay. We stayed, and essentially the lamps there, you have to, it's a big sticky out bit that you have to twist in the actual lamp itself to turn on. It's not a button or a thing like we have here, it's a twister thing. And I was lifting up my suitcase to put on this little couch that was there. My dad was doing some ironing. My cousin was just behind me somewhere, and my mum was going from room to room. And all of a sudden, I was looking down at my suitcase, and I heard this click, which sounded like the lamp. And so I looked up, and the lamp came on, but nobody had touched it. And you have to twist it. So it was that click that I heard of the twisting it, but nobody had touched it. And it came on. And then I looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me, and I said, "Did you touch that?" And he said, "No." And then we heard the click again, and it went back off. So that was one strange experience. We actually did stay in a supposedly haunted hotel. I believe it was in Nashville. I can never remember the name of this one. I remember all the other hotels we stayed in, but this one escapes me for some reason. I think it was because it was semi in the middle of nowhere. All there was just a Starbucks across the road. Um, so I can't remember which one it was, but we stayed in a few but didn't have experiences there because we stayed in another one nearby when we did. We were doing all the Graceland and Elvis and things like that, and we stayed in one that I believe Marilyn Monroe stayed in or visited, I'm sure. We went to Vegas, so I believe there's quite a lot of haunted hotels in Vegas. I mean, we stayed at the Vidara, which was literally new at the time. It had only just opened, I think. Um, but we obviously went through and shopped in the different hotels there, and a lot of them are haunted. Oh, I suppose, yeah. So aside from hotel experiences, then there's my nana's house. So when my mum was young, she said that essentially she started holding hands with a little boy, and she told my nana and granddad that she'd held hands with a little boy. And then one night, there's a room upstairs where I ended up staying in when we had to move in um due to house troubles a couple of years back. Um and my uncle said the plug socket came shooting out of the wall by itself. My mum experienced someone sitting on the bed and pulling the covers. Um and then throughout the years I mean they got a medium in back then and said that it was a boy called Keith who had drowned in the river when it used to just be rivers there. But over the years, we've heard different things. And actually, when we were kids, my cousins used to stay over, so there used to be quite a bunch of us way back when. I think on a Saturday there used to be about 7 kids running round and we were playing and doing all sorts. And I remember us being upstairs in the spare room, and I remember hearing running up the stairs. And so I went out to see because I thought it was my cousin, and there was nobody coming up the stairs. But even to this day, my grandparents at night, they sleep downstairs, um, actually hear, noises and walking and actually my nan doesn't remember this, but a couple of years back she said she was washing up in the kitchen and she felt a presence behind her, and she turned around to see this smiling person, not not scary smiling, like a sort of angelic, completely blue, looking at her. But she has no memory of this for some reason. But she definitely told us because I remembered it so well. And this was only 7 years ago, no, six maybe, 5 years ago that she had this. But yeah, if you stay over, you do potentially hear a few things. But I suppose really now I should go to the strangest experience I've had, which was in Conway in Wales. We used to have a caravan at Aberconway, the Aberconway park, where the caravan park, and it has well, it still does. It's basically it has the caravans, and then it has this little spa that's for the residents. It's got a pool, saunas, a restaurant. I think they've redone it so many times now, so there's probably more things in there since then. Because this was 2006 potentially. Well, we sold it off in 2009, 2010, and basically I spent my entire childhood going there. So yeah, it was 2006, I think, this particular incident. So we'd gone on the beach for the afternoon. So where the caravan park is, you walk down and you'll end up on the sand. You walk down the sand and then you end up on the beach. Um, Aberconway Bay, I believe it is. Um, and so we'd been there one day, and so we were walking back up, getting up to the caravans because we were about to go and get dinner and stuff for the night and, go inside. And it was me, my granddad, and my cousin because my granddad did end up remarrying. Um, and she has uh, 3 sons. So it was me, my other cousin, and we were walking up and we were just talking about things. And we were going, you have to sort of go across this car park where there was like a public toilet that was sealed off to get onto the grass verge on the hill to then walk in onto the caravan park. And so that's what we were doing. And as we got onto the verge of the hill, I had this sudden real urge to just look to my left. It was such a strong urge, and so I did. And when I looked across the verge, there was what can only be described as a black silhouette of a witch. That's the only way I can explain it. She looked how you think an old witch would. Black silhouette, completely 2D figure. Um, she was running, like her legs were going, you could see, She was about a foot off the ground. She had her arms outstretched in front of her like, like stereotypical zombie. Like that, she was running fast, completely 2D shape, and I sort of stopped my tracks. I nudged my cousin and I pointed to it. He then nudged my granddad, and we all just stood staring at this thing we just could not explain. And she then disappeared into the locked public toilets. And then there was a flash, like a camera flash almost. It was so bright, and then disappeared, and we were so freaked out. We ran all the way back to the caravan, which was a couple of feet away, to where my step grandma was folding clothes, and we just sort of started babbling at her that we'd seen a witch. I think my granddad explained later about actually what happened, but to this day we still talk about it at any dinners or anytime we see each other. We always talk about it, all three of us. And it's been, if I was right, 2006. It's been 14, 19 years. It was 20 years next year. It'll be 20 years ago that happened. So that's a long time ago, but we always remembered that specific day because it was so strange. And that is, I think, the weirdest experience we ever had there because, I mean, even to this day, it was just a silhouette, completely 2D, of what can only be described as a witch running, with her arms outstretched and so many feet off the ground, and then disappeared into the locked public toilets with a flash. I mean, it's just picturing it now. It's so bizarre when you think about it. But yeah, that remains my strangest experience I've ever had. Um, but I suppose, and it's funny because I suppose people could ask, you're not scared. Generally, there are things I've not been scared about. The only time I've ever been scared by an experience is actually probably my most recent experience, which happened outside. So we were driving, and this person in front was just being an idiot in the car. Like, they were going dead slow, then they were stopping and starting, and it was just really odd. So they pulled off to go to the different way. And as they did that, I mean, I think everybody does. You look at them to think, like, you idiot, what are you doing? So I was doing that to see who was driving. And as I did that, I can't even really explain it. There was these giant, humongous, like, inhuman, bulging eyes just pressed against the window. This, like, face that didn't really seem like a face. Like, it was really unusual. So much so that I just felt like I couldn't look. But I saw and then sort of half looked away. And so I thought, but it wasn't a mask or anything. And then I looked again as the person was still driving the other way, and it had gone. All I saw now was just the person's legs, as they were driving away like you would normally see. It was bizarre. That, and then I think another one, which happened around the same time, was we were in the supermarket and we'd gone down this aisle and this woman with a basket just stopped in the middle of the aisle, and she kind of, have you ever seen that film Smile, where the woman is sort of like, she plonks her head like sideways and then smiles? It was kind of like that, but this was long before the film came out. Um, she was just looking at me and smiling and stopped, and like, I didn't know her. It's not like she was anybody I knew, otherwise. That's what I mean, 'cause I kept looking at her thinking, do I know her? But no, she just stopped all of a sudden. But all these things culminated in just strange experiences. And then I suppose you could call psychic experiences along those lines, because I have had some weird. At one time, we were planning on going to the Trafford Centre by bus, but we didn't know which stand it was going to be at the time. They were all named after letters way back when. This was 2000s yet again. So we didn't know until we were going to get there the next day. Um, I didn't know what I was going to wear. So the night before, I had a dream about us doing that. So I had a dream I was like pushing my cousin's pram, because he was little at the time, and I was wearing certain clothes, and we were going along. Everyone had started running for the bus because we were going to be late. And the letter was R. So the next day I'd forgotten about the dream, and we got there and we were discovering it. And then I said, unbeknownst to me, I was like, "Oh, can I push the pram?" So I was doing that, and then all of a sudden, like, we were going to be late, just like my dream. And then as we were running to it, I looked up and saw the R, and that's when it all came back to me. And I was like, "What?" Because we didn't know, literally did not know until the following day what stand it was going to be at, because we knew the number of the bus, we just didn't know the stand, and we were just going to find out when we got there. But I've had strange dreams like that, and I've had, visions where we were at my granddad's house, the one with the landing again, and my cousin was trying to start this motorbike that he had. It wasn't for starting. So he kept, trying to kick the engine over. And then all of a sudden, as we stood in the doorway watching, it was like a film just came into my head of the bike starting with my granddad sat on it, and it going off and my granddad falling off and then rolling around along the drive. And then it was like I came out of it. It was a bit like That's So Raven. And then as I did that, everything I'd just seen played out in front of me. It was really strange. So I've had so many experiences over the years. I mean, I'm 28 now. I'll be 29 next year. So I have been certainly loaded with experiences. And there are probably some that I'm completely forgetting as well. Because I'm sure there was. I told you about the lamp TV one. No, the lamp one. But I'm sure there was a different. I'm sure there was another one either on that same holiday or later on. Because you had the lamp, or it might have been the same place, I'm not sure. It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't Vegas. Um, but I find paranormal stuff really fascinating. I love reading about it as well, and I listen to different podcasts about it. I listen to Two Girls, One Ghost podcast. Um, they're good. I've been listening to their podcast for I think maybe I started listening in 2019, 18. I was at the very beginning of that podcast, or early days, because now it's been 6 or 7 years since then. Because actually I got really unwell at the end of, not as unwell as I am now, but I had some sort of bug that lasted almost a month at the end of 2019, and I didn't go out, so I suppose preparation for me now, but I listened to a lot of Two Girls, One Ghost at the time. But I suppose I always like to end on a spooky reading of some sort. So I'm just deciding what I want to read, because I've read Sylvia Plath poems before, but I actually think I might read from. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so it's not necessarily spooky. It's a bit unusual, I suppose you could say. I have this copy of Lewis Carroll's The Hunting of the Snark, which says here describes the epic voyage of the bellman and his distinctly unusual crew in search of that dangerous phenomenon, the boojum. As with Alice, Carroll found inspiration in little girl Beatrice Chataway to write one of the longest and best sustained nonsense verses in the English language. So, let's pick a part of this, shall we? So, the bellman's speech. Bit second, the bellman's speech. The bellman himself they all praised to the skies. Such carriage, such ease, and such grace. Such solemnity, too. One could see he was wise the moment one looked in his face. He had bought a large map representing the sea, without the least vestige of land, and the crew were much pleased when they found it to be a map they could all understand. What's the good of Mercator's North Poles and Equators, tropic zones and meridian lines? So the bellman would cry, and the crew would reply, they are merely conventional signs. Other maps are such shapes with their islands and capes, but we've got our brave captain to thank, so the crew would protest, that he's bought us the best, a perfect and absolute blank. This was charming, no doubt, but they shortly found out that the captain they trusted so well had only one notion for crossing the ocean, and that was to tinkle his bell. He was thoughtful and grave, but the orders he gave were enough to bewilder a crew. When he cried, steer to starboard, but keep her head larboard, what on earth was the helmsman to do? Then the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes. A trilling of the bellman remarked. That frequently happens in tropical climes, when a vessel is, so to speak, snarked. But the principal failing occurred in the sailing, and the bellman, perplexed and distressed, said he had hoped, at least, when the wind blew due east, the ship would not travel due west. But the danger was past, they had launched at last, with their boxes, portmanteaus, and bags. Yet at first sight the crew were not pleased with the view, which consisted of chasms and crags. The bellman perceived that their spirits were low, and repeated in musical tone some jokes he had kept for a season of woe, but the crew would do anything but groan. He served out some grog with a liberal hand, and bade them sit down on the beach, and they could not but own their captain looked grand, as he stood and delivered his speech. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. They were all of them fond of quotations, so they drank to his health, and they gave him 3 cheers, while he served out additional rations. We have sailed many months, we have sailed many weeks. 4 weeks to the month for you may mark, but never as yet is your captain who speaks. Have we caught the least glimpse of a snark? We have sailed many weeks, we have sailed many days, 7 days to the week I allow, but a snark on the which we might lovingly gaze, we have never beheld till now. Come, listen, my men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks by which you may know wherever you go the warranted genuine snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meagre and hollow but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavour of will-o'-the-wisp. Its habit of getting up late, you'll agree that it carries too far, when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea, and dines on the following day. The third is its slowness in taking a jest. Should you happen to venture on one, it will sigh like a thing that is deeply distressed, and it will always look grave at a pun. The fourth is its fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular batch, distinguishing those that have feathers and bites from those that have whiskers and scratch. For although common snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it is my duty to say some are bosoms. The bellman broke off in alarm, for the baker had fainted away. And that is the end of Bit the Second, that chapter in Lewis Carroll's The Hunting of the Snark, and subsequently the end of this episode. I apologise if this one was slightly rambly, being that you tell paranormal experiences, it can be slightly rambly. But as I said with this podcast, it's conversational. It is not produced at all. It's very easy, very flowy. There are some that will be more extensive in their notes and things like that, such as the Daphne du Maurier episode I did. But this one is more relaxed. Next week's may be more structured. Who knows? But this is been all about my paranormal experiences. I would love to know any of your paranormal experiences that you may have had, because I'm sure loads of people have. So do let me know. And do let me know if you've got any book recommendations about the paranormal that you particularly enjoy, because I would love to read those as well. But as we near the end, I would just like to say thank you for your support in listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. It does mean a lot. And I hope you're well, and if you're not well, I hope it brings you some comfort. And I'm signing off, so thank you for listening to the Maple Moon. This has been Courtney, and goodbye.